The morning the HOA sent me that letter, the sky was clear and the smell of cut grass still lingered in the air. I'd been up since 5, like always, tending to my small property at the edge of Maplewood Estates, a community that was supposed to be rural-friendly, according to the glossy brochure I got when I first moved in. My name's Jack Turner, and for the better part of 30 years, I've worked machines that most of the new folks around here have only ever seen in movies. My tractor isn't some rusted old relic, it's a well-maintained, bright green John Deere that's been with me through storms, droughts, and endless sun-baked seasons. It's my livelihood and my pride. I remember leaning against the fence that morning, sipping black coffee from a metal thermos, watching the sun rise over the hill. The calm was broken when I noticed a white envelope pinned to my mailbox with bright red tape, the kind of red tape that screamed, "Official." I pulled it off and unfolded the letter, half expecting it to be another newsletter about the upcoming Maplewood Fall Festival. Instead, it started with the words, "Notice of violation." My stomach turned before I even read the rest. The letter, written in the cold, clipped tone of HOA bureaucracy, informed me that visible farm equipment was not permitted to be parked in residential view. They claimed my tractor detracted from the community aesthetic and violated Section 4B of the neighborhood standards. I laughed at first, a bitter, disbelieving laugh, thinking maybe it was a joke. But when I saw the signature at the bottom, Karen Wilcox, HOA president, my laughter turned into something else. Karen had been on my back since the day she moved in 3 years ago, a self-appointed guardian of suburban perfection. To her, everything had to look like a magazine cover. She'd complained about my weather vane once, saying it clashed with the roofline. She'd even taken issue with my dog's bark, claiming it was too country for community life. But banning my tractor, the very thing that kept my property running, that was a new low. I walked over to where it sat, under the open shed by the gravel drive. Its green paint glimmered in the sunlight, spotless, oiled, and ready to work. I'd used it to mow not just my land but half the neighborhood during last year's windstorm cleanup when no one else volunteered. I'd even helped haul debris out of the common lot so people's cars wouldn't get stuck. And now they wanted it gone. By noon, word had spread. A few neighbors texted me, the decent ones, the old-timers who remembered when Maplewood was nothing more than rolling pasture. They said they'd heard Karen talking about upholding the image of the community. Image, that's all it ever was to her. Trimmed lawns, designer fences, and a picture-perfect illusion of order. No room for a working man or his tools. I sat on my porch that afternoon, watching the mail truck crawl down the road, and thought about what that tractor meant. It wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol of who I was, and what this land used to be. Before the HOAs, before the city folks moved in with their rules and their manicured gardens, this place was alive with work. You could hear engines running at sunrise and smell hay drying in the fields. Now, the only thing most of them grew was resentment, neatly hidden behind their flower beds and white fences. That evening, I decided I wasn't going to roll over. I wasn't going to let some suburban committee tell me how to live. I cleaned the tractor top to bottom, polished the chrome, oiled the pistons, checked the tires. I wanted it looking pristine, because if they thought it was an eyesore, I was going to make it shine so bright they'd see their reflection in it. The next day, I called the HOA office. Their line went straight to voicemail, so I left a message, calm but direct. "This is Jack Turner, Lot 17. I received your notice about my tractor. You might want to read your own bylaws again before you start handing out violations. That machine isn't farm equipment, it's maintenance equipment. I use it to mow the HOA's shared easement every other week. If you want to find me, you'll need to explain why you've been benefiting from the same equipment you're now banning." I didn't expect a response right away, but I didn't expect what came next either. The following morning, I woke up to find a crowd gathered at the end of my driveway, Karen, her husband, 2 board members, and a clipboard-holding man who looked like a lawyer. They stood there like they were serving justice, the way a vulture circles roadkill. Karen waved the papers like a victory flag. "Jack, we're issuing a formal removal order," she said, smiling that tight, artificial smile that never reached her eyes. "If the tractor isn't gone by Friday, we'll tow it at your expense and impose daily fines." I set down my coffee and stepped forward slowly. "Karen," I said, "that tractor's been here longer than you've been in this neighborhood." She shrugged, her perfume cloud drifting in the air. "Rules evolve, Jack. It's not personal." That's when I realized something. It was entirely personal. She'd been looking for a reason, any reason, to make a statement. Maybe she didn't like that I reminded her this used to be farmland, not a postcard. Or maybe she just needed someone to prove her authority to. Either way, I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I could have called a lawyer, filed a complaint, or started some drawn-out appeal. But I've never been much for paperwork wars. I prefer actions that make a point. So that night, sitting by the porch light, I came up with a plan, one that would speak louder than any letter or argument. If they didn't want to see my tractor parked on my property, maybe they'd like to see it somewhere else. Somewhere impossible to ignore. By Thursday, I was ready. I checked the oil, filled the tank, and backed the tractor out of the shed. The engine purred like a beast waking from sleep. I could feel its power under my hands, steady and certain. The HOA had scheduled their monthly meeting that night, at the clubhouse on Maplewood Lane, the heart of their little empire. Every time I'd walked past that building, I'd imagined how much hypocrisy it held behind those beige walls. Well, tonight, it was going to hold something else. As dusk fell, I drove down the main street, slow and deliberate, the headlights glowing gold in the fading light. Curtains twitched as I passed. A few neighbors waved. Others just stared, wide-eyed, phones raised to film. By the time I reached the clubhouse, I could already see Karen's Lexus parked out front, the kind of shiny monument to ego that practically screamed, "Look at me." I stopped the tractor right in front of the entrance. The sound of the engine rumbled across the manicured lawns. I could see faces through the window, confused, irritated, shocked. I revved the engine once, just enough to make the glass tremble, then killed the ignition. And with that, I climbed down, brushed the dust from my jeans, and walked inside. The meeting had already started. Karen was at the podium, mid-sentence, talking about community harmony. Every head turned as I opened the door. Silence followed me like a shadow. I looked straight at her and said, calm as a Sunday breeze, "You said you didn't want my tractor on my property. So I brought it here instead." Karen's face went pale, then red, then somewhere between the two. That was the moment the war officially began. The silence in that clubhouse could have stopped time itself. Every board member stared at me like I'd just driven a tank into their living room, which in a way, wasn't far from the truth. My boots echoed on the polished tile as I took a seat in the back of the room, folding my arms like any other resident come to watch democracy in action. Outside, through the big front windows, the nose of my John Deere gleamed under the floodlights. Its reflection stretched across the parking lot, a defiant green monument to everything the HOA was trying to suppress. Karen stuttered for a moment, her voice losing its rehearsed smoothness. "Mr. Turner," she finally managed, "you can't just bring machinery to a board meeting." I smiled, calm as a pond at dawn. "Well, you said it couldn't stay at my property. So I figured here was the next best spot, where all the decisions get made." The room rippled with muffled laughter from a few of the older residents, folks who'd been quietly waiting for someone to put Karen in her place. She tried to maintain control, straightening her papers and adjusting her pearl necklace. "This is a clear violation of community policy," she snapped. "And your behavior is disruptive." "Disruptive?" I leaned back, still smiling. "Seems like the only disruption here is the rulebook you all keep rewriting to suit your moods." The HOA's lawyer, a pale man with an expensive suit and no backbone, cleared his throat. "Mr. Turner, this isn't the venue for confrontation. We can discuss your violation through proper channels. I shook my head. That's the problem. Every time I try to talk, you hide behind channels and policies. I'm here now, and so's my tractor. Let's settle it face to face. Karen gestured toward the window, her voice rising an octave. You've parked that thing on community property. I looked out at the John Deere, steady and proud. That thing cleared snow from these same roads last winter when your contractor bailed mid-storm. You all sent me a thank you email, remember that? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The crowd murmured. That was the turning point, when people remembered. A retired teacher named Mrs. Henderson stood up from the second row. He's right, she said. If it wasn't for Jack, half of us would have been stuck in our driveways for days. Another man spoke up, Tom Grady, a mechanic who'd lived here even longer than me. Yeah, and he helped me dig out that drainage trench after the flood last spring. The board didn't lift a finger then. Karen's face tightened. This isn't about gratitude, she said coldly. It's about maintaining standards. Whose standards? I asked. Yours? Or the people who actually live here and work this land? Her husband, Greg, finally piped up, a man who'd spent most of his time hiding behind her authority like a shadow. Jack, nobody's trying to insult your lifestyle. But tractors belong on farms, not in front of homes. That's just reality. I stood, my voice steady but hard. Greg, this is a farm. Maybe not to you, but to those of us who've been here since before there was a clubhouse, before there were streetlights, before you paved over the field where my father used to graze cattle, this land remembers. A hush swept through the room. For the first time, Karen didn't have a quick comeback. I didn't press further. I just turned toward the door and said over my shoulder, you want the tractor gone? Then you can move it yourselves. But if you touch it, you'll be paying for every dent and scratch. Then I left, calm, deliberate, my boots striking the tile like a drumbeat. Outside, the night air hit me like a wall of quiet. I climbed back onto the tractor, twisted the key, and the engine roared to life. The crowd that had gathered near the door stepped back. I idled for a moment, watching Karen's reflection in the glass, small, trembling, but furious. Instead of heading home, I parked the tractor right in front of the clubhouse sign, perfectly aligned, centered, and unmistakable. Then I turned off the engine, locked it, and walked home under the glow of the streetlights. The next morning, the photo was everywhere. Someone had posted it on the neighborhood forum, Jack Turner parks tractor at HOA meeting. With over 100 comments. Half the residents were laughing, the other half were clutching their pearls. By noon, it had spread beyond Maplewood. Local reporters were calling. One headline read, Suburban Farmer Fights Back Against HOA Rules, with a Tractor. Karen was livid. She called an emergency meeting that same day, accusing me of public defamation. I didn't attend. Instead, I mowed my lawn. The rhythmic sound of the blades cutting grass was more satisfying than any argument I could have made in that room. By evening, I got another letter. This one had thicker paper, fancier font, and the unmistakable smell of panic. It said the HOA was issuing a $1,500 fine for unauthorized equipment storage on common grounds. I laughed out loud, shaking my head. That night, I wrote my own letter, not to the HOA, but to every resident in Maplewood. I printed 50 copies and walked door to door, slipping them into mailboxes. I kept it simple, friends and neighbors, I've lived here for 23 years. I've seen this place grow from open fields into the neighborhood it is today. I've mowed your yards, helped during storms, and never asked for a dime. Now they want to fine me for owning a tractor, the same tractor that served us all. If you believe in fairness and community, not just appearance, come to Friday's open meeting. Let's remind them this neighborhood belongs to us, not a few signatures on a letterhead. I wasn't sure what to expect, maybe a handful of supporters, maybe none. But when Friday came, the clubhouse parking lot overflowed. Cars lined both sides of the street. I stood off to the side, watching as families, retirees, and even some of the newcomers gathered, talking quietly but determined. The air was thick with something I hadn't felt here in years, unity. Inside, the board table looked smaller than ever, surrounded by residents instead of subjects. Karen tried to call the meeting to order, but her voice cracked under the weight of the crowd. "This isn't a rally," she warned. "This is an official HOA meeting." Tom Grady raised a hand. "Then officially, we'd like to talk about overreach." The applause that followed nearly shook the walls. I stayed quiet, letting others speak. People began to list grievances, arbitrary fines, ridiculous aesthetic rules, invasive inspections. The floodgates opened. One woman spoke about being fined for a non-compliant mailbox color. Another man got cited for having a visible trash can for more than 15 minutes after collection. By the time they were done, the board looked like a row of deflated balloons. When Karen tried to regain control, she pointed at me. "This is all because of him. He's turned you against your own community." I stepped forward slowly, voice low but firm. "No, Karen. You did that yourself. All I did was park a tractor." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mrs. Henderson, bless her heart, stood again. "Maybe it's time we elected people who actually remember what community means." The room erupted in cheers. People clapped, whistled, shouted. Karen looked around helplessly, realizing the tide had turned. That night, I didn't celebrate. I just sat on my porch, watching the stars shimmer above the dark line of trees. My dog, Rusty, lay at my feet, tail thumping lazily. In the distance, I could see the clubhouse lights flicker, the last embers of control burning out. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Karen wasn't the type to surrender. She'd be back, angrier, sneakier, more determined to win. And sure enough, 2 days later, I got another letter. This time, they weren't just threatening fines. They were threatening legal action. That's when things started to get serious. When I tore open that new letter, the tone was different, colder, sharper, and dripping with the kind of arrogance that only comes from people who think a title makes them untouchable. The first line read, "Formal notice of legal action pending." They'd gone and hired an outside law firm now, not just their HOA volunteer lawyer who'd probably been paid in coffee and pretension. The document claimed my defiant actions had undermined community standards and caused reputational damage to the association. Reputational damage, that phrase made me laugh so hard Rusty barked in confusion. They said my tractor stunt encouraged non-compliance and provoked hostility toward the HOA board. They even accused me of creating unsafe conditions on community property. Unsafe? My tractor was cleaner than most of their SUVs and parked with more care than Karen's husband managed in his driveway every weekend. But beneath the legal fluff, I could see what it really was, intimidation. They thought that a few paragraphs of legalese and a threat of court would scare me into submission. They didn't realize I'd faced far worse storms than that. I'd weathered debt, droughts, and the loss of people I loved. A lawyer's letter wasn't going to break me. Still, I wasn't stupid. I knew how these things worked, power games wrapped in paperwork. So, I decided to play smarter. That afternoon, I made a call to a friend of mine, an old buddy from my days working construction out in Iron County. His name's Dean Fletcher, and he's the kind of man you call when you're up against a wall. Dean's a lawyer now, but not the slick kind you see on billboards. He's got calloused hands and a mind like a bear trap. I explained everything, from the violation notice to the meeting chaos to the latest legal threat. He didn't interrupt, just listened, letting out the occasional grunt. When I finished, there was silence for a few seconds. Then Dean said, "Jack, you've got them cornered and they don't like it. That's why they're flailing." "So what do I do?" I asked. He chuckled. "Simple. You hit them where they're weakest. Procedure. These HOA types love to act official, but they screw up the paperwork more often than not. Send me copies of every letter they've sent you. If there's a mistake, even a small one, we'll make them eat it." I spent that evening digging through my desk drawers, pulling out every notice, every printed email, every slip of paper with a Maplewood header. Rusty sat beside me as I stacked the pile, the smell of ink and paper thick in the room. I scanned them and sent them to Dean. He replied less than an hour later, "Jack, this is gold. They've violated their own bylaws 3 times over." Turns out, the HOA had never formally amended the community standards they were citing. The so-called tractor ban wasn't even legally enacted. It was voted on by 4 board members in a closed meeting without proper resident notification. And worse, the bylaws explicitly allowed utility equipment used for land maintenance, which my tractor obviously qualified as. Dean drafted a letter of his own, one that didn't threaten, but warned. It was concise, professional, and devastatingly precise. It cited section after section of their own rules, attached evidence, and concluded with a single line that made me grin ear to ear: "Any continued attempt to fine or threaten Mr. Turner over the use or storage of maintenance equipment will constitute harassment and breach of fiduciary duty under state statute." We sent it certified mail to every board member. For 2 days, there was silence. Then, the fireworks started. Karen called me personally this time. Her voice was tense, like a violin string about to snap. "Jack," she said, "was that really necessary? A lawyer? We could have resolved this peacefully." I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunlight glint off the tractor outside. "Karen, I tried peaceful. You sent me 5 letters, a lawyer, and a threat. This is me matching your energy." She huffed. "You're turning this into a circus." "No, Karen," I said evenly. "You did that when you turned a working man's tractor into a scandal." Then I hung up. 2 hours later, a message popped up on the neighborhood forum. It was from one of the board members, Paul, the treasurer. He'd resigned. His message was short: "This has gone too far. I didn't sign up to bully neighbors." That post lit a fuse. Within minutes, people were commenting, cheering him on, demanding transparency, even calling for Karen's resignation. The tide was shifting faster than I could have hoped. That weekend, I was out back chopping wood when a silver SUV pulled into my driveway. It wasn't Karen's. This one had a local news station logo on the side. A young reporter stepped out with a cameraman in tow. She smiled, professional and a little cautious. "Mr. Turner? I'm Emily from Channel 8 News. Mind if we ask you a few questions about the HOA situation?" I nodded slowly. "Sure. As long as you tell the truth." They set up by the fence, with the tractor gleaming in the background. She asked all the usual questions: why I did it, what message I wanted to send, how the HOA reacted. I kept my answers plain and honest. "I'm not trying to make a scene," I told her. "I'm just standing up for what's right. You can't move into a place built on hard work and then shame the tools that built it." When that segment aired the next day, things exploded. The story went viral. People across the state, even across the country, were sharing it online. Comments poured in from farmers, veterans, and homeowners who'd had their own run-ins with overreaching HOAs. Words like hero and legend started popping up, which felt strange, because all I'd really done was refuse to bow. Karen, on the other hand, was melting down. Reports came out that she'd been calling residents, begging them to issue public statements defending the board. Few did. Most were too busy laughing at the memes people had made of her scolding my tractor on TV. But for all the attention, I knew something darker was brewing beneath it. People like Karen don't just quit, they scheme. One night, around 11 p.m., I heard tires crunching on the gravel outside. Rusty growled low. I stepped onto the porch, flashlight in hand. There, in the dim edge of the beam, I saw movement, 2 figures near the shed. The air went cold. "Hey!" I barked. The figures froze, then bolted, one tripping over a flower bed as they scrambled into the dark. I ran to the shed, heart pounding. The lock on the side door was snapped, and a faint smell of gasoline hung in the air. They'd tried to sabotage the tractor. I spent the rest of the night sitting by it, shotgun across my lap, Rusty by my side. I didn't sleep a minute. By dawn, I called the sheriff. They came out, took photos, filed a report. Nothing stolen, just vandalism, attempted, not completed. The deputy gave me a knowing look. "You got enemies in that HOA?" he asked. I just smiled tiredly. You could say that. When the news broke that someone had tried to torch my tractor, sympathy for me skyrocketed. Even people who hadn't cared before were now furious at the idea of such cowardice. Karen publicly denied any involvement, but her reputation was done for. By the end of that week, 2 more board members resigned. The HOA called for an emergency election. The residents, the real community, nominated a new board. They chose people who actually lived here to live, not to lord over others. Karen, predictably, tried to run again, claiming leadership experience. She got 5 votes, one of them was her husband's. The day the new board took office, the first order of business was to repeal the visible farm equipment rule. The second was to officially thank me for reminding the community of its roots. I didn't want thanks. I didn't need applause. I just wanted to see this place breathe again, free from the chokehold of people who confused control with care. But even as things calmed, I couldn't shake a thought that kept tugging at me. When you stand up to power, you win more than a fight, you awaken something. People stop being afraid. They start questioning. And once they start, there's no going back. For Maplewood, that awakening had only just begun. When the dust settled and the new board took over, Maplewood felt different, lighter, freer, almost like the place had exhaled for the first time in years. Neighbors who'd barely waved before now stopped to chat at the mailbox. Kids played ball in the street again without anyone complaining about noise violations. Even the air smelled better, fresher, like the land itself was relieved to be left alone. I remember standing by the fence one morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the dew-slick lawns. The sound of birds and distant laughter replaced the low hum of tension that had hung over the neighborhood for so long. My John Deere sat proudly in its usual spot, the early light glinting off the hood like a badge of honor. After all the chaos, the thing that had caused so much trouble had become a symbol, not of rebellion, but of respect. People began to stop by just to see it, shake my hand, or drop off baked goods and coffee as thanks. It was strange, in a way. I hadn't meant to become any kind of hero, I just refused to be pushed around. But that simple act had rippled through every street in Maplewood. One afternoon, Mrs. Henderson came by with a covered plate. "Apple pie," she said, smiling warmly. "You've earned it, Jack." "Ma'am," I said, tipping my hat, "I think you all earned it. I just gave you a nudge." She chuckled. "Sometimes that's all it takes." And she was right. That's how change works, not with speeches or signs, but with someone willing to be the first to say, enough. For a while, peace settled in like a long overdue season. The new HOA board ran things with a lighter touch. They focused on fixing potholes, repainting the park benches, and organizing community events that people actually wanted to attend. There were no more surprise fines, no more letters on red paper, no more power trips disguised as policy. But life has a funny way of testing you just when you think things are calm. About 3 months after the new board took over, I got a letter, not from the HOA this time, but from the county zoning office. My gut tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a notice stating that residential properties within the Maplewood Estates district are not authorized for agricultural machinery use without a permit. It was the same nonsense all over again, different envelope, same intent. Someone had filed a complaint. I didn't have to guess who. I went straight to the county office the next morning. The clerk there, a young guy with glasses too big for his face, looked nervous when he saw me approach. Mr. Turner, he stammered, we just follow procedure here. We received an anonymous tip. Anonymous? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You mean Karen Wilcox? He looked away but didn't deny it. I sighed. All right, son. Let's see what we're dealing with. He handed me the file. The complaint accused me of operating heavy machinery on residential land, storing fuel without permit, and posing environmental hazards. It was absurd, every claim either false or exaggerated. I didn't operate a farm, I maintained my property. My fuel was in approved containers. My land was clean and inspected every year. But bureaucracies don't care about truth, they care about process. So, I did what I had to, I filed for the permit. I filled out every form, paid every fee, and made sure everything was airtight. It took 2 weeks, but when the inspector finally came, he was impressed. You've got one of the cleanest setups I've seen, he said, checking boxes on his clipboard. I wish half the farms I inspect were this organized. I grinned. Tell that to whoever filed the complaint. He chuckled. Oh, I'll make sure the report says it loud and clear. When that official approval letter arrived, stamped, signed, and sealed, I framed it. Hung it right above the tractor's dashboard. Now, not only was my machine legal, it was government certified. Karen must have seen the county truck leaving my property that day, because that evening, I caught sight of her walking her dog past my fence, eyes fixed on me. She didn't say a word, but I could see it in her face, that stubborn disbelief that her crusade had failed again. I didn't wave. I just smiled and turned back to my work. But the thing about people like Karen is that they can't stand losing. Not just once, not ever. A week later, someone dumped a pile of garbage bags right at the end of my driveway. Plastic, rotting food, the works. Another night, someone spray-painted "redneck" on the side of my mailbox. I cleaned it off without complaint. No need to fan the flames. Still, it wore on me. I could feel that old anger stirring, the same kind that had driven me to park the tractor in front of their meeting. But I didn't want another fight. I'd proven my point. One Saturday morning, I decided to do something different. I drove the tractor, slow and steady, to the community park. Not for protest this time, but to help. The new board was organizing a cleanup day, planting trees and fixing benches. I'd brought the tractor to haul mulch, tools, and supplies. The same machine that had once been banned was now leading a community project. When I parked it by the edge of the playground, people cheered. Kids ran up to touch it, posing for pictures. One little boy, no older than 7, looked up at me and asked, "Mister, is this the tractor that beat the bad guys?" I laughed. Something like that, kid. Karen didn't show up that day. She'd retreated into her house, curtains drawn, yard neglected. Rumor had it she was trying to move, but no one wanted to buy a house from the woman who tried to burn down the heart of the neighborhood. The following week, the local paper ran a follow-up story about Maplewood's transformation. The headline read, "From conflict to community, the neighborhood that fought back." They even printed a photo of me on the tractor surrounded by smiling neighbors. When the reporter asked me what changed, I said, "We remembered who we were." People forget that a neighborhood isn't defined by fences or bylaws. It's defined by how you treat the person next door. It wasn't poetic, but it was true. Life found its rhythm again after that. I went back to my routines, tending the yard, fixing the fence, helping neighbors with odd jobs. The tractor purred every morning like it was proud of its legacy. The air carried a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I sat on the porch with Rusty and thought about how close I'd come to losing everything to a rule that never should have existed. How something as simple as standing my ground had turned strangers into allies and a neighborhood into a family. The world outside Maplewood kept spinning, more rules, more noise, more distractions. But here, for now, we had peace. And peace, I've learned, isn't quiet. It's earned. By the time autumn rolled in, Maplewood looked like the kind of neighborhood you'd see in a painting, maple trees blazing red and gold, kids biking down the curved streets, laughter echoing from the park. It felt earned, like the calm after a long, wild storm. The air had that crisp sweetness that only comes when summer finally surrenders. I'd start my mornings the same way I always had, black coffee, a little country music humming from the old radio, and Rusty curled up by my boots. The tractor sat under its shed again, polished and proud, its green paint catching the morning light. Every time I looked at it, I thought about what it stood for now. Not rebellion. Not defiance. But balance, a reminder that even when people try to pave over your roots, you can still grow back stronger. One morning, I was tightening a belt under the hood when Tom Grady stopped by. He had a newspaper tucked under his arm and that easy grin he always carried. "You seen this, Jack?" he said, handing me the front page. The headline read, "Maplewood Estates named Best Improved Community of the Year." There was a picture of the park, the new benches, and a big group of neighbors smiling. Somewhere near the bottom, they'd even mentioned me by name. Local resident Jack Turner played a key role in rebuilding community spirit. I laughed. Well, I'll be. Never thought I'd see my name in print for anything other than a speeding ticket. Tom chuckled. Guess you're famous now. The guy who beat the HOA. I shook my head. Nah. Just the guy who refused to move his tractor. He grinned wider. Sometimes that's all it takes. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood settled into a rhythm that felt right. The new board handled business the way it should have been handled all along, transparent, fair, and with a touch of humor. The meetings weren't battlefields anymore, they were potlucks. People showed up with pies, not pitchforks. They laughed, argued politely, and actually listened to each other. It wasn't perfect, no place ever is, but it was human again. One evening, just before sunset, I got a knock on the door. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize the woman standing there. Karen Wilcox. Her hair was shorter, her clothes simpler, and her posture, that once proud, stiff frame, looked tired. She held an envelope in her hand and gave a small, hesitant smile. "Evening, Jack," she said softly. "Evening," I replied, cautious but polite. "What brings you by?" She took a deep breath, glancing down. "I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. For everything. The rules, the threats, the letters. I let it get personal, and it shouldn't have." The apology caught me off guard. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. Finally, I nodded. "That takes guts, Karen. Thank you." She looked up, eyes a little glassy. "I lost a lot of friends because of what I did. I thought I was protecting something, order, image, whatever. But I see now I was just trying to control what I didn't understand." I leaned on the doorframe. "You weren't the first, and you won't be the last. Sometimes it takes breaking something to see how fragile it really was." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a simple note and a check for $1,500, the same amount she'd fined me months ago. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "But I wanted to make it right." I stared at the check, then tore it neatly in half. Already is, I said. Keep your money. Just don't forget what you learned. She smiled faintly, nodded, and walked away down the quiet road. I watched her go, feeling something unexpected, not triumph, but peace. Maybe she'd finally found her own. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey and watched the lights of Maplewood flicker in the distance. Rusty lay beside me, tail tapping softly against the wood. For the first time in a long while, everything felt right. No battles to fight, no rules to dodge, just stillness. But I couldn't help thinking about what it all meant. How a simple act, refusing to move a tractor, had somehow turned into a story about standing up for what's right. How sometimes the smallest pushback can remind people of who they are. That thought carried me into winter. When the first snow came, thick and heavy, I fired up the tractor again. The engine's growl echoed across the cold air as I plowed driveways for the whole street, just like old times. Folks came out with coffee and cookies, waving, laughing, calling my name. Someone yelled, "Careful, Jack. HOA might fine you for heroism," and the whole street roared with laughter. It hit me then, this was what community was supposed to feel like. Shared work, shared warmth, shared stories. A few weeks later, the new HOA board invited me to speak at the annual winter gathering. I almost said no, public speaking was never my thing, but they insisted. When I stepped onto the little stage inside the clubhouse, the same place I'd once stormed into with my tractor idling outside, the room went quiet. I looked around, faces old and new, people smiling, waiting. I cleared my throat. "I'm not a speech guy," I said. "I don't have fancy words or big lessons. But I've learned something these past months: rules don't build communities. People do. Neighbors do. You can have all the bylaws in the world, but if you forget to look out for each other, you've already lost what matters." The room was silent, except for a few nods and smiles. So, take care of your homes, sure. But take care of your neighbors too. Because when things get rough, and they always do, it won't be the rules that save you. It'll be the folks willing to fire up their tractors in a storm. Applause filled the room. I stepped back, a little embarrassed, but proud all the same. After the meeting, Mrs. Henderson pulled me aside and said, "You know, Jack, you should run for the board next year." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. After all that? No thanks. I'm better off outside fixing fences than sitting behind tables. She grinned. Fair enough. But don't be surprised if we name a bench after you. I shrugged. As long as it's not a parking spot. That night, I drove the tractor one last slow lap around the neighborhood before putting it away for the season. The snow crunched under the tires, the lights from the houses reflecting off the white ground. Every porch I passed had a wreath, a light, or a wave from a neighbor. When I parked it back in the shed, I shut off the engine and listened to the quiet, deep, honest, earned quiet. Looking up at the stars, I thought about my father, about how he used to say, "A man's tools outlive his troubles." I guess he was right. Because that tractor, the same one they tried to ban, wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a story, a legacy, a lesson carved into the heart of Maplewood. They banned my tractor once. But in the end, it built something they could never take away.